Hi, I'm Anthony Arnone. Sitting down with me today is Ed Ashton, author of Mickey 7. Ed, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Can you tell us a little bit about Mickey 7, the plot and kind of synopsis for it?
Sure. The short tagline for this book is Mickey 7 is a book about a man whose job is to die. The slightly longer description is about a man whose job is to die and not make it stick. So Mickey 7 is a dark comedy. It's set about 1,000 years in our future. And it's got some philosophical underpinnings based on a problem that people have been chewing over for the last 400 years or so, which is called the teletransport paradox. This is a question that was first raised in 1755. And the question is, if you were able to copy your mind, your personality, everything about you, your love of strawberry ice cream, your hatred of electronic dance music, copy it all into another body, would that new person be you, or would that just be some other guy running around getting his hands all over your stuff? And that question is the central premise of my protagonist's life, because that's what happens to him. He is someone who is brought onto an interstellar colonization mission as the expendable. And the expendable is exactly what it sounds like. It's someone whose job is to do every dangerous to suicidal job that has to be done. And if he dies, they're able to create a new body for him and upload his stored memories and his stored personality into that new body, which sounds like immortality. And that's how they sell it to him. But it's a really crappy form of immortality, because in between all that immortality, he has to die again and
kind of brings the mood down a little bit when you die.
Yeah, it really does. And so by the beginning of the book, he's already died 6 times. That's why it's called Mickey 7. And he's realized at this point that signing on to this mission was not his best choice, maybe not the smartest thing that he ever did, but this is a job that you literally cannot leave. You can't even die to escape. And so that's the dilemma that he faces.
So you obviously have a passion for science fiction. That's the genre that the book falls into. Can you tell me a little bit about where those passions started?
I've been reading science fiction as long as I can remember. My father was a big fan of science fiction, and I was a precocious little scamp. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, started pulling books off of his shelf and reading them. At that time, it was things like the early works of George R. R. Martin, Clifford D. Simak, a lot of Asimov, obviously. And I developed a love for the form. But science fiction has always had a sort of a special place in my heart. I think probably because it was where I started, and it's what really got me interested in reading in the first place.
Are there any specific works that sparked that initial idea and concept for Mickey 7? I think I had heard something about you had mentioned the transporter.
Yeah, so the idea behind this, again, the sort of philosophical underpinning of the book is the teletransport paradox. And because the way that this thing works in Star Trek world is that, you've seen the people step onto the pad and it scans the position of every atom in your body. Right? Records all that, transmits that information, and then reconstructs you at the other end. And meantime, you're sort of getting dissolved, right? At this end. Is that person who comes out on the other end really you? To an outside observer, it seems like it is. Like, you still sound the same, you talk the same, you've got the same memories, you tell them that you're you. But we all sort of imagine ourselves as like a little person sitting inside our own heads and looking out from our eyes, right? Is that the same you looking out behind that person's eyes? This was looking out behind the eyes of the person who stepped onto the transporter pad. And my thought, even as a 5-year-old kid watching this, was, no, that's crazy. That's not transporting anyone. That's just a murder machine. They're getting on there. And you think about, well, when they first designed this thing and they were testing it, they're not going to do the dissolving part right away because they don't know if it works, right? So you're going to step on that pad. It's going to measure all of your atoms. They're going to reconstruct it at the other end. And then the person at the other end is going to call you and say, yeah, he came through okay. Go ahead and dissolve the first guy.
Let's vaporize guy 1.
Do you get into the acid bath? And my answer was no, that's a different person. And if I get in that path, I'm just dead.
A lot of people have a passion for reading, but they don't necessarily convert it or turn it into writing. How do you turn a passion like that into actually writing and writing short stories and novellas and novels?
I mean, you write because you need to express yourself. It's not a career choice. And this is a point I try to make when people ask me this question. If what you're looking for is a way to make an income, there are a literal infinite number of ways to make an income which are easier than writing. Writing is not a way to make money. Writing is a way to say something to the world, to speak from one to many and say, look, I have something I've thought of, I have something to say. And hopefully someone listens and finds it interesting. And so that's something that's got to come from inside you. And it is perfectly reasonable and true for the majority of people to be an avid reader and not have any interest at all in writing. That's a perfectly fine way to be. You're probably a happier person. Lonely thing to do. It can be very frustrating, particularly if you're interested in getting published. You know, that the hurdles to leap over to get published are so high that it can be an incredibly sort of soul-crushing process to go through. But if you feel a need to express yourself, then you need to express yourself. And I started writing short stories when I was like 5 years old. You know, it's something that I've always wanted to do.
I find the world of Niflheim fascinating and interesting, especially because of where we're from, upstate New York. Is there any inspiration at all from kind of where you live to the world of Niflheim?
Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that I started writing this book in January in Rochester, New York. I mean, that's you know, looking out the window and seeing 3 feet of snow in the yard sort of makes it a natural setting for the book. And I've always had kind of an interest in extremely cold places, and how I've always wanted to go to Antarctica. I like cold. I like extreme environments. I like thinking about how you would deal with those really extreme, difficult to survive environments. And so I thought it would make a really interesting setting for the book.
I don't think many people experience upstate New York and the weather that we have sometimes in the winter and say, I want to find colder. Like, where can I go which will be a lot more extreme than this? So yeah, let's take a step back. Mickey 7 was, I guess, somewhat recently picked up to be a film directed by Bong Joon Ho, and it's got a couple prominent actors and actresses on board, such as Robert Pattinson, Mark Ruffalo, Toni Collette. What has been your experience with any and all of those people? How did hearing the news that people like that would be involved in a creation of your own, what did that feel like? So
first of all, it's not actually that recent.
Okay.
So I got the news that Warner Brothers was optioning the book in March of 2020.
2020?
Yeah, so it's been a while ago.
The book came out in February 22, correct?
That's correct.
How does your book fall into people in Hollywood's hands 2 years before it's released?
That's an interesting question. It's not just before it was released. I didn't even have a publication contract yet. I had no contract for this book when it was optioned by Warner Brothers. The answer for how that happened, the only explanation I've been able to come up with is my agent is some sort of wizard, or possibly
practice the dark arts,
or has some compromat on somebody in Hollywood. I don't really know how he managed to pull that off. He's an amazing person. The contract for this book with Solaris, who is my original publisher in the UK, had been signed by that point, but I did not have a North American publisher yet. They were still shopping it around. And so the publication deal with St. Martin's Press, those all fell into place after the option, after the movie option. Knowing that the book has been optioned by a studio makes it a lot easier to sell to various publishers. So that's how that occurred.
So Mickey 7 was recently, I believe, nominated as a Goodreads 2020 Choice Award for sci-fi and fantasy.
Yes, it was.
Any thoughts on that?
Hope I win.
I went and voted for you for the record when I saw that.
I appreciate that. I'm really counting on all of my Robert Pattinson stands to power me through. I've seen a couple of Twitter
accounts dedicated to the man, so I think I think getting them involved is kind of key to the win here.
Yeah, I'm friends now with lots of Robert Pattinson fans, and apparently there are a lot of Robert Pattinson fans out there.
Can you blame him though? I mean, the guy's pretty great.
He's a good actor. He's a good actor. Very cold hands was my experience of him.
Oh, okay. You met him. That's awesome.
Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about what it was like to meet Robert?
You know, I got to spend some time on set where they're filming the movie. I got to meet Robert Pattinson, got to spend some time with Bong Joon Ho. It's an amazingly intricate process. Director Bong apparently films about 500 hours of film for every 1 hour that makes it onto the screen. He's extremely demanding, exacting in the way that he works. When he first became attached to a project, which again was back in this would have been in the late summer of 2020. He and I had about a 2-hour Zoom call where he wanted to talk about the book. He was still trying to decide if this was something he wanted to do or not. And so it was a little bit of a get to know you and a little bit of me desperately trying to sell him on how great the book was. So he
almost like a job interview of some sort.
Yeah, it really was. But he's a wonderful person. He's incredibly thoughtful and kind. He knew the book better than I did.
Wow.
At that point, I mean, he was asking me questions. At one point, he asked me, how do creepers reproduce? And that set me back. And I was, God, I guess when like a mother creeper and a daddy creeper love each other very much, I don't know. Yeah. Like I hadn't thought about it. That's something that occurs off screen. I've thought about it now because it goes into Antimatter Blues.
Antimatter Blues.
In Antimatter Blues, I address that question because Bong Joon Ho made me think about it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, he's a very smart, very thoughtful person. He has great hair and fabulous scarves. You know, you can't say enough about him. And he's brilliant. My sincere hope right now is that I don't wind up being the person who ruined Bong Joon Ho's career. That was another thing about director Bong is when I met with him on set, he was nervous that I wouldn't like his script. He was genuinely nervous that I wouldn't like it. It was crazy. I'm like, yes, I liked your script very much. It was wonderful.
Trying your best to avoid spoilers. Is there any specific scene or moment in your book that you're really excited to see on the big screen?
That's an interesting question. During that conversation, that Zoom conversation that I had with director Bong, one of the things that he said was, I wouldn't ordinarily do this, but I'm going to ask you if there's one thing in this book, because you wrote a 350-page novel. I'm going to write a 120-page script. Many things are going to have to come out. What is the one thing that you feel must be in the movie? And I will promise you that I will put that in the movie.
That's awesome.
He did not have to do that, but he did. And the answer, my answer was immediate, it's chapter 19, which if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read the book, read and look for chapter 19.
Earmark chapter 19.
So it's the medical experiments chapter. And that was actually part of what we got to watch him film when we were on set, which was also fantastic. Director Bong is very exacting in the way that he works. He treats every frame of the film like a painting, and everything has to be composed just so. And on the other hand, it's sort of overwhelming to see hundreds of people sitting here dedicating months of their lives to bringing something that sprung out of my head to life. That was really, it was humbling, and it was also really almost overwhelming. So
you got to go on set. What is your relation to the film? Do you have like any credits or anything like that? Like, what is your involvement level, I guess, to say? I'm an executive producer. That is awesome. That's really cool. That means nothing. It means something. That is a big fat nothing. It's fancy, but it's okay. It means my name will be up on the screen. It'll roll past on the screen when the credits roll. You might be like fourth or fifth as an executive producer. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I don't have any direct involvement in the film. As you mentioned before, this is the first book in the Mickey 7 series. Antimatter Blues comes out March 2023. I guess the first part of this question is, did you go into writing Mickey 7 planning a series? And if not, what's it like to try to turn your concept and idea into a series? So the first thing that you have to understand about me is that I don't plan anything. I drift through life like an amoeba floating on the surface of the ocean, and just like whatever comes into my tendrils, I eat. I mean, that's just sort of how I exist. So the way that this book came to be, so I wrote, my first novel came out in 2015. Okay. Sold about 10,000 copies, which is not bad for a debut novel. That was okay. That's awesome. That was good enough to get me a second contract. That was The End of Ordinary. That was published in 2017. That one did not do so well. The publishing house that I was working with actually
The division of HarperCollins shut down 2 weeks before my book came out, which is not great from
not
a
ideal.
publicity standpoint. Yeah. That one sold fewer than 1,000 copies, which is not great. And so my third book sold 0 copies because my agent could not find a buyer for it. Because
so this is a book that's unreleased?
Okay. Because the second book didn't sell, and so publishers are like, well, his second book didn't sell. His third book is going to not sell even more. We don't want that. And so I had this really tough conversation with my agent where he said, you know, this whole novel thing maybe isn't working for you. Maybe you need to like write some short stories or change your name or like move to a different country or something because this is not working out great for you. And so what I told him was, look, I'm like 3/4 of the way through this new book I've been working on. I get what you're saying that I probably need to just crawl into a hole and die. That's fair. But I want to finish this book first. And if you can't sell it, you can't sell it. That's fine. But if you can, that's great too. And so that book was Mickey 7. You know, bottom line was, no, I wasn't planning on a series here. I was barely even planning on finishing this book.
So what was it like to actually sit down and write the sequel then? Did it kind of flow naturally, or did you feel like there was any ruts or anything like that kind of pick up a story? Would this be your first time writing a sequel, I guess, would be my first question.
I with all my books, I try to leave that door open. So with this book, and I did the same thing with Antimatter Blues. I wrote a complete story. There's no to be continued here or anything. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But at the end, there's a little door open to say, maybe there's some more stuff that can happen here. And that's how I wrote this, because if this was going to be a standalone, I wanted people to be happy that they had read a standalone and they had no further questions. And feedback that I've gotten is that that's the case. But at the same time, I wanted it to naturally flow into another book if it needed to, and that's what happened. And the same thing with Antimatter Blues.
So Antimatter Blues releases March of 2023. Anything that you'd want to say, kind of like a pitch as to why people might want to pick up that book, or potentially even the first book in the series?
Yeah, so Antimatter Blues follows in the same spirit as Mickey 7. The main difference is that because Mickey 7 is the first book in the series, there's a lot of world building that goes into that. And you know, as a science fiction author, world building is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
If I'm going to write a book about, you know, 2 people falling in love in Manhattan in 2022, all I have to say is they're in Manhattan.
You don't got to build Manhattan.
You describe the Empire State Building off in the distance, and everybody knows exactly where you are, exactly what the social milieu is. With science fiction, you can't do that. With science fiction, you have to get the reader to understand how the world works. How far in the future are we? Are we in is this our future? Is this some alternate timeline? There's all sorts of things that have to go into that, and you can't just tell them. You can't just do what they call an info dump. All the world building gets done in Mickey 7, which means Antimatter Blues, I can just get to the fun stuff, which is like the adventure, and Antimatter Blues really is more of a straightforward adventure.
Awesome.
There's a lot more. There's a lot more action because I don't have to do the world building; it's already there. And so it's a little less thinky and a little more fun, I think, than Mickey 7. So if that's the sort of thing that you like, I've had people go both ways. Say they liked Mickey 7 more, they liked Antimatter Blues more, depending on whether they had more of a taste for just fun adventure or like I really like world building stuff. You know, if that's the case, you might like Mickey 7 more.